Yo, what's up, Goblins? It's your boy Randage, the Upstart Echelon, and today I'm going to be showcasing one of my signature decks, Gravesleepers. So, first thing you're going to notice with this deck is we're not running Tsukuyomis or guards. Instead, we're using Skill Drain to our advantage, and we're playing more of an aggressive list. I've tried and tested this list many different times. There's been different cards I've taken in and taken out. Notably, as you can see, we aren't running Breaker. Instead, we're running Exiled Force because it can still work under Skill Drain. I mess with the Compulse and the Type 8 ratios, the Terraforming ratios, my body ratios, tomato ratios. I've just played this deck a lot of times, and I've had a lot of feedback through multiple people throughout the Go Format Discord, and I think this deck is finally in its finished state, as wishy-washy as that sounds. So let's just start going over the cards here. The monster lineup, we run the Exiled Force, as I previously just talked about. This card's really solid. It can deal with set monsters, it can deal with boss monsters, problematic monsters. It's just a solid card all around, and it can still work under Skill Drain. I previously was using Breaker in this slot, and as good as Breaker is, sometimes it's just dead with Skill Drain. So, the next card, we're running 3 copies of Assailant, pretty standard 2k beater. With Necrovalley, it can pierce scapegoats. Under Skill Drain, it doesn't get this effect, but it still is a 2k beater under Necro. Well, it doesn't pierce. Sorry, it just changes the monster's attack position or battle position to attack on the goats. You know what I mean. We run 3 copies of Spear Soldier. This is the one that pierces defense monsters. It's a little bit weaker in the defense than Assailant, so this thing can die to Tsukuyomi, but it's still a 2k beater that works under Necrovalley and piercing damage. Then we, of course, run the 3 copies of Spy. I don't think you can play this deck without Spy at 3. Then we run 3 Mystic Tomatoes in the main deck. This card is pretty solid. It lets you search out your Gravekeepers. It also is a decent aggro card. It can force back row removal. This thing also prevents you from a really detrimental creature swap, which is one of this deck's weaknesses. And then we run the 1 Sandgan, which can be summoned out from Tomato. And then it also searches Exiled Force or any of our Gravekeeper monsters. We run 3 Book of Moon. This is pretty solid, pretty standard. It's really nice for cycling Gravekeepers. It's nice for setting Thousand Eyes, chaining in the battle phase. Then we run Charity and Greed. No duo, so just 2 pieces of Trinity. The reason for that, I think, is duo is just dead most games when you're playing Gravekeepers, because Skill Drain and Necrovalley tend to turn off most of the cards in their hand. So, we're also running 2 copies of My Body as a Shield. This card's really underrated. The 1500 life point cost is pretty expensive, which is why I'm not running Ring of Destruction in this deck, because my life points are always going to be a factor in every game I play, which is another reason for not running Duo, if you could argue, but that's not the main reason. Anyway, this card's really good. It protects you against blowout cards like Mirror Force and Torrential. It also prevents Nobleman of Crossout for your Spy. Just a really solid card. MST, pretty standard. It's just a fill slot. You could put something else in here if you don't want to run an MST, but I still recommend it, because sometimes people play Decrees in the main deck. Not often, but this also stops level limit area B and other stuff like that. Then we got 3 Necrovalley, pretty standard in a Gravekeeper's list. You could mess with this and put it to 2 and Terraforming at 3 in the main if you want to quote-unquote deck thin, but I'm pretty sure 3 actual copies of Necro is always better. We run 2 Noblemen of Crossout. Standard, doesn't really need an explanation. The only time this card really hurts us is if the opponent is also running Spy and we banish our own. So just be careful with this game 2 and on 3 versus an opponent that is playing a deck that could side Gravekeeper Spies. Obviously also in the mirror match. We got Snatch Steal. So there's some people that say running Snatch Steal without a Tribute Monster or Tsukuyomi is not worth it, because then it just stays up and they keep gaining life points back, but I disagree with that. This card's really strong. It can tempo swing into the aggro matchup. Let's say they have 2 monsters on the board, you can take one and crash them. This also takes BLS and Sork. You got to watch out for Book of Moon, but that's obvious. I think Snatch is just a really good card. 2 Terraforming, basically the same conversation as Necrovalley. You got to run them. 3 Compulse. This card's really solid as well. This deals with Thousand Eyes. It lets us cycle our monsters back from Sakuretsuzen, etc. It lets us bounce back their sets and put them back a turn. There's a lot of different things you can do with Compulse, and I think 3 copies is totally correct. The lowest I would ever go is 2. And another really good thing about this is it avoids Nobleman of Crossout for Spy as well. It sets us back a turn, but I think it's worth it preserving the Spy. And another thing I guess I'll touch on with Compulse is this also prevents creature swaps, which I explained with the tomato. Creature swaps is very, very strong against our deck, so this helps us prevent that. And another thing that's very, very niche and hardly comes up, but the occasional Monarch player, if they use Soul Exchange, you can bounce your monster back. Mirror Force, probably one of the best 1-copy cards in this meta. Gotta run it. 2 Skill Drain. I've gone 2 to 3 Skill Drains in this list over and over. I think 2 is the correct number because 3 is very bricky and can also clog your back row or your hand. And I think that having 2 Skill Drains is a very good sweet spot number. I could be wrong. I mean, there's also people that think you shouldn't run Skill Drain and Gravekeepers in general. But I think that 2 copies is a pretty solid number, and versus aggro, you're going to be siding them out anyway. So if we can make our game 1 a little bit more consistent against all types of decks, I think that's best. 3 Solemns to protect our field, our monsters, our skill drain, Necro, everything that we need to protect. This is where the life points come into play as well. And then in our flex spot, we run 1 copy of Spell Type 8. This is another card I've messed around with in multiple copies as well, but I think 1 is the correct number. This card prevents Nobleman of Crossout, Snatch Steal, all those really powerful single targeting spells. It also stops Nobleman of Crossout. Wait, didn't I? Oh, I just said Nobleman. Sorry. We can also use this card with discarding dead spells in our hand. So, like, if we have dead my bodies, like our life points are too low, or if we have multiple terraformings, and instead of using them both, maybe we want to keep a copy to discard off of Spell Type 8. Game 1 versus aggro, you could pitch your Nobleman. I mean, this stuff doesn't really come up that much, but it is a possibility. And there might even be situations where you don't open Solemn, but a lot of back row, and maybe you just want to set your back row with Spell Type 8 for heavy and maybe discard an extra copy of Terraforming or something. It's a 2-for-1 in that scenario. You're using 2 cards to negate their 1, but if that card's dead anyway, I think it's worth it if it provides tempo for your board and keeps your board up. Let's jump into the side deck real quick. So we run 3 copies of Berserk Gorilla. This is a card I've actually used in the main deck before instead of Tomato. I used to side the Tomatoes for swap games, and then I would main deck the Gorillas just for a stronger aggro game 1. This card's really good. It's a 2k beater. It's really good under Skill Drain as well. So this is just a solid card. I think there's no other beater I would like to side in for the aggro matchup. 3 Mobius instead of 2 because we have a lot of tribute fodder with our Spies and Tomatoes. This is mainly just for burn. I think Mobius is one of the best cards to bring in against burn. Heavy Storm as well. It's in the side instead of the main since we're running Necrovalley and Skill Drain combination. You could justify maining it anyway, but I think bringing it in game 2, especially when you're going first or against burn, is better. 3rd copy of Terraforming is just to make the Chaos matchup more consistent, or if you're against Empty Jar or something. That's another thing people don't really remember, is that Necrovalley actually prevents Empty Jar and Library FTK as well, because they cannot add the cards from the grave. So I would bring 3rd Terraforming in against Chaos Turbo, Chaos Control, E-Jar, and Library. Anti-Spell Fragrance. We run a lot of spells, but they aren't really spells we need to use immediately. I think this card against Reasoning Gate, Library, Empty Jar is a lot better in our favor instead of theirs. So I would always bring this card in, and then you can combo Mobius with Anti-Spell as well. Not running 3 copies. I've gone back and forth with 3 copies of this as well. I think because it's a continuous trap, it makes this card a little bit cloggy, so I like to run 2 copies instead. 2 Bottomless Trap Hole. This is a tech choice. These are your flex spots for the side deck, in my opinion, these 2 cards. I'm deciding to run Bottomless because recently, in the past month or so, month and a half, the Dueling Book rated ladder has seen a lot of Geisty's Chaos Warrior deck, and Bottomless Trap Hole, in my opinion, is one of the best side cards you can bring in against that matchup, because Bottomless keeps them off attributes for their lights, and it banishes Blade Knight and Sasuke Samurai, for example. So I think this is a decent card against that matchup, and it's also decent in general against aggro, which in aggro we're going to be taking out skill drains. So I think this is a pretty good card. And then we've got 3 Dust Shoots. This is for Chaos, obviously. It's also really good against combo decks, like I further explained earlier. Reasoning Gate as well. Just a pretty solid card. Extras, just filler, because we're not running one, but our opponent doesn't know that at the start of the game. So I guess before I show you guys a replay, I will just kind of explain what I tend to side in and out versus certain matchups. I'm not going to go super in-depth. It's just kind of be really quick here. So against aggro, I'm bringing in my 3 Berserk Gorillas, and I'm taking out my 3 Compulses. I might leave 1 Compulse in if I'm going first, and I fear the Nobleman for my Spy, but generally I side these 3 out for the 3 Gorillas. I take out the Skill Drains for the Bottomless, and if I'm going second, I will take the Heavy Storm. And I think I accidentally said I take Heavy first when I was going over this card originally. I meant I usually put this card in when I'm going second. So against Chaos, we're bringing in our triple Dust Shoot, and we're also bringing in our 3rd Terraforming. Cards I like to side out versus Chaos is probably my Mystical Space Typhoon, because Chaos doesn't really play much back row. And depending on what else the opponent has been running, I might side out like Compulse if they're not running Metamorphosis. If they are running Metamorphosis, I'll keep Compulse in because I want to bounce Thousand Eyes. But that's generally what I do. If they do have meta, I'll probably take out the Spell Type 8 and whatever else I think might not be super good against that. Versus combo, you're taking in Anti-Spell and Dust Shoots, the Terraforming, and 1 or 2 copies of Mobius, depending on if they play back row or not, or if I'm going first, I will probably put in 1 copy of Mobius to combo off the Anti-Spell. And what I take out versus combo is the 3 Compulse, take out the Mirror Force, unless it's like Reasoning Gate, then I'll keep Mirror Force in. But generally they're going to True Nade anyway, so it's pretty trivial. Take out the Mystical Space Typhoon. You get where this is going. The only other deck I didn't really cover is Go Control, and honestly, versus Go Control, I don't really side anything in at all. The only thing I'll do versus Go Control is if I'm going second, I'll put in Heavy Storm, and I'll just take out Type 8, and that's about it. So hopefully this deck will inspire some of you guys to play it. I hope my explanations for stuff was pretty clear and decisive and quick enough. Looks like we're almost at 14 minutes in this video, so I'm going to just show you guys a replay of me playing this deck, and thanks for watching. It's your boy, Randy!